I think you guys are definitely going to find this to be a great episode. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell so that anytime that we drop videos in the future, YouTube notifies you. Of course, sub to the channel, sub to Mob Entertainment Group, Mob Entertainment News, sub to Bill's channel, which is Partners in Crime. And so without further ado, allow me to welcome our primary guest for this week, Ms. Ellen Poulsen. Welcome to the show, Ellen.
Hi, JC and Bill. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Doing great. I think people are going to be really excited to see you and get a new, for one thing, a fresh face, but then also a fresh voice and perspective and stuff. I think I'm excited. I think a lot of people are going to be. Just taking a jab and like, oh, is this your hero? Is this your big guy? Look what he did.
Sure, the psychological war, if you will, that the cops and the feds would play, especially back then. They knew they couldn't convict a lot of these guys. They certainly couldn't give them the sentences that they would have liked to. I'm sure in a post RICO law era, Lucky would have been taken down pretty quickly and easily. But in that era, hey, they did what they had to do, and they deflated his image a bit. And Ellen, as you know, there were other gangsters, mafiosos, that were also charged in that case, and weren't they in the courtroom too?
Yes. So what do you think, Bill, that it was kind of a police secret that he had informed in the sense on this stash of narcotics, that
No, I think what
possibly it
happened
wasn't known
was,
on the street? Or
my understanding of this situation, which I'm familiar with, first of all, I have no record of him ever being busted for narcotics. In 23, he was busted for, and January 15th, he was busted for unlawful entry. Maybe it came from that, I don't know, or maybe there was just never any charges. I never saw anything in an FBI file that he was actually busted in 23. But
wasn't he busted for narcotics when he was I was going to say in high school, when he was studying for the SATs? No, wasn't he? Wasn't that what got him sent to that Hampton farm
Yes.
when he was 16 or
Yeah.
something?
Now keep in mind,
but
Bill.
in 23, he'd have been much older than that.
No, but this was when he was a teenager.
Oh, yeah,
He
okay.
was
But I thought
busted
he's been busted before a lot. But I
Yes.
thought we were talking
Dealing.
about
Now
1923.
keep in
when
mind,
this happened.
teenagers, a lot of
23
times juvenile
buses.
stuff is not as public as adult stuff. So you can,
Right.
a lot of the time, especially back then, they had sort of they had this view that you could restart your life at 18. Even when I was in trouble as a high school kid and arrested, I was allowed to seal my record. And to this day, you can look me up and you'll only find anything that I had ever done post 18. But when it comes to juvenile records, it's largely sealed up. But the cops would know about it.
And this is a long
DA
time
and
ago.
those guys would know. And yes, he was involved with the heroin business. And back then, or really applies now too, if you're selling heroin at the low levels, a lot of times it's because you need money for your habit. And, it's very rare to see like a high school kid, let's say, that's involved with the heroin business that's not using already. So I'd have to research it a little bit more, but I would think that Luciano, yes, was in trouble as a teenager for that. That was something that street kids back then, unfortunately, did. They, even if he wasn't mainlining, they still smoked it. And, the opium business goes back to, the 1800s. After the Civil War, we had a huge opiate crisis in the 1870s. And it just was, so it was still a common thing. Hence why, they wouldn't have made it illegal if heroin wasn't a problem.
Right. But the elephant in the room is, did he rat?
My
understanding is, Ellen, that he led them to heroin that was his.
Well, it most likely was his, but this was why this can bring us to a compromise, because you say he was not charged with narcotics in 1923 because he did the deal. He gave them the narcotics. because the arrest was selling dope to John Lyons of Federal Secret Service informers, but denied selling him dope. It was 1 ounce of heroin. His apartment was searched. He had this was in cross examination. There was allegedly, according to Dewey, 2.5 ounce package of morphine and opium found in his apartment, because they searched his apartment and they found the heroin, not the heroin, they found the morphine and they found the opium. So that's when he told Joseph Van Bransky, narcotics agent in charge of New York City, that at 163 Mulberry Street, they would find a trunk of narcotics.
A trunk.
So was a trunk of narcotics. So they were his narcotics. As
So
you
in
said,
exchange for his complete exoneration,
I would imagine. What do you?
but that's
what
still,
do you
to me,
think?
that's not ratty. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna say that's extremely close to the line of snitching, because
Well, he's about to cross it, because I know something else.
What do you know?
nobody knows though what the police will do with that information. Furthermore, if they it's sort of like when guys do a 302 session with the FBI, but then they don't carry out any further stuff. Everybody knows the FBI probably takes the information that was said in the 302, and it's not like it leaves their brains. Okay, once you say something to the FBI, it's going to be at the DOJ's office.
Oh, there's a report, and everything you say is in the report.
Yeah, and so if they were willing to drop the, I don't like, if I had been with marijuana, let's say, with what I was doing, if I had told the police, you can find 10 pounds of marijuana sitting at this and this house, they're going to look at who owns this property. They're going to be looking at who's been frequenting this property. It may not be me directly saying a name, but it's giving them enough of a clue to where they can find these people, enough of them on their own. You say where it's at, you know, if it was his own house, then I guess whatever, you could say, look, man, at my house, this is what I got, and I'm going to cop to it because whatever. But even then, you would think that they're not going to drop the case. What they're going to do is allow him to plead guilty to a relatively minor thing. And
it just depends on the culture, I guess. If you're like, look, I'm going to help you get this off the street, but you can't pin me.
Furthermore, back then, when you look at the level of opiate use and all that, ounces, that was guys that were carrying ounces. That was a lot at that time. I mean, we didn't, they didn't have the same level of opiate issues we have now, to where guys, move U-Haul trucks with it or whatever.
Right.
But there was a case, by the way, in my area in 1950 where an Armenian mafia member who was tied to the Genovese family, the Sika brothers, who controlled the heroin business in my old neighborhood, he was killed in my city in 1950. And the cops in California had linked him to about 18 ounces, I want to say. And they had said that it would supply the heroin users of my old town for, I don't know, 2 weeks or a month. It wasn't too long, but back then that was a lot of dope. And that was a major mob case. The guy's name was Abe Davidian. He was linked to Mickey Cohen, Sika, the Genovese family, because Genovese was involved with it. And who was the boss of the Genovese family prior? That was the Luciano family. And so the reality is that, guy, if you're a teenager in particular with ounces at that time, that is a lot. That you're sort of a mid-level heroin dealer at that point. And if you're that young, you're involved and you have that. And that's the kind of amounts they would have taken serious by then at that point. You might get a slap, not even a slap on a wrist now with that much. You'll get less time than the big boys, but ounces during that time period would have been a lot for a kid that age, a lot. So,
well, if we're going to talk about his character, this might surprise you guys. Maybe not, Ellen. Maybe when they were prosecuting Dutch Schultz the second time, this is before the Dewey thing. Okay, remember they prosecuted him, and then he had a second trial, when he greased all the people and stuff and they let him go? He went to that little town. and he
Yes,
was
yes,
remember all
yes.
that? Okay,
Yeah.
during that time, there was a guy named Crazy Karpis. I think he was Lithuanian. Okay, he was a guy they wanted. All right, and Luciano
Is that
didn't care
Alvin
about him as
Karpis?
much. Yeah, his name was Crazy Karpis.
Creepy,
Karpis. I think.
not creepy.
Creepy Karpis. That's it. Okay,
Oh,
the
Al.
Lithuanian guy. You got it.
Yeah,
Creepy.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, they want him. He's wanted. They don't know where he is. And the second trial of Dutch is going on. Lucky in FBI files is documented as reaching out to a guy named McConnelly, who's like a journalist. He wanted to meet him at a racetrack. And when he finally met with him and stuff, he said, hey, we might be able to tell you where Creepy is
Oh,
if
yeah?
you go light on Dutch Schultz. And they said, there's no way in hell we're going to make that deal. And that was the end of it. But it's on record that he approached
Oh,
them and
yeah?
said, I will rat out this guy if you go easy on this guy.
Well, you know, Creepy was arrested in 36.
Yeah. But this deal never happened. It might have been 33, to be honest with you. But I know it's in
Oh,
record.
because Schultz was dead and gone
Yeah.
by 36. Right?
Yeah. But I know that Lucky and the syndicate basically tried to make a deal officially to turn one guy in to get Dutch off.
So then
the
he was
interesting thing
into.
is to get into the mind of Lucky, as Dewey is hammering him, and doing all this stuff. The only reason that Dewey is sucking air at this point is because Lucky saved him from being killed. And Dutch had Anastasia stalking him, getting his habits. They were going to kill him in a pharmacy, I think. He's a dead man walking. And the only reason he's alive is because Lucky allowed it. And now here he is, hammering Lucky. It's
But
ironic.
do we know that at that time? Did he know
No.
that there was?
But Lucky knew it. Lucky damn sure knew it.
And I don't think that
You
Dewey
can
would have
imagine
even
the
believed it
aggravation and
anyway.
frustration sitting on the stand going like, you'd be dead, you idiot, if it wasn't
Right. I saved your life.
Yeah, I saved you and you don't even know it, you dumbass. It had to be
This is how you
frustrating.
repay me. This is what you do to me after. Do you realize how
Right, but just
your
to
name
blurt
should
that
be
out would
lucky.
be a Jack Nicholson
Right.
moment. You can't handle the truth,
And with the whole stash house thing again, if you give out that kind of details, the criminals of today, they have a phrase, dry snitching.
Yeah.
And dry snitching is sort of when you make it, you give the cops enough details to where they can go bust the guy, but
They can connect dots. You didn't
You
say
know,
he
yeah,
did it, but yeah, they've got
I
enough
didn't
information.
snitch.
I never heard that
didn't say the name. I
Yeah,
didn't say
dry
the name of the
snitching's a
guy,
thing.
but you did describe exactly what they needed to do to go get the guy. But I didn't say his name, and it's sort of the plausible. It's like the CIA with plausible deniability. That kind of mentality where we didn't take this guy out, this dictator out. Well, no, you just gave a bunch of weapons to the guys that did, though, and
Right.
well, we didn't do it,
Or if there was this mob guy that committed suicide by a heroin overdose in California, and then I told the cops, hey, I heard that it wasn't an overdose, that maybe somebody killed him, and then they link it back to JC. I dry snitched on him.
Yeah.
I didn't say JC killed him, but I tipped him off to something that they were like, oh, JC was there. I thought that was a suicide. And then they put it together on
whoever that guy was. I really wasn't there, guys. So just the cops
But
are
that's
watching.
dry snitching. You know what I mean? That's dry snitching.
Fast forwarding to speaking of CIA OSS, the precursor agency to the CIA, that's yet another government agency that it might be connecting some dots here, but it would seem to me that those guys, especially military intelligence people today, it's the Pentagon and the CIA, which, the late 40s, 47, 48 is, I think, is when they came out officially. But those guys are going to definitely do their homework before they deal with anybody. And if the OSS, Office of Strategic Service, I believe was the official name, what it stood for, the acronym did, they worked with Lucky. That's definitely public record. Operation Underworld is what they called it. And for the audience, real quick, what that was during the Second World War, obviously we had legitimate national security concerns about our ports in the West when it came to the Japanese Navy, and in the East with the German U-boats in particular. And so what they did was the OSS rightfully knew that the mafia had a lot of control over the commerce there, and they knew, they probably, they knew the security guys and probably hired them and all that stuff. And so what the OSS did was they worked with Lucky, who by then had been sentenced to this big term from the prostitution case we're talking about, and was sitting in Dannemora, which for the people from New York, you guys all know that was literally called Siberia because of how far north it is and how cold it is. And they worked with him regarding trying to prevent quote unquote sabotage. So it would seem
they
to
also
me,
got him to get, because he had contacts in Sicily. He got Sicilians to give him the lay of the land and things they would know in real time back then. They were like, anything we need to know about our infiltration and locations of military and stuff like that. He had connections in Sicily that were also relaying information like, hey, here's where they are. Here's here's the terrain. Here's what you need to know. And he was very useful in World War II. So they extradited him out.
So when it came to his case, he was deported obviously after the war. Dewey, from what I have seen, again, these are from documentaries. Dewey signed off on it, I guess, but he also had his doubts about whether Luciano really helped that much. That's what
he did. You know what? You know who really had a problem with it? Mayor LaGuardia. He's on record writing long notes. He's like, hey, I heard that Luciano, like on the boat when he's leaving, like they're picturing Luciano in handcuffs being, like he's shackled and chained and he's heading off, right? He was like, no, he's on this boat and he's like, there's rumors that he's having parties, that he's serving alcoholic beverages, blah, blah, blah. He was allowed a lawyer and he was allowed 3 family members. One of the family members was Lansky. One of the family members was Frank Costello, and I can't remember the last guy. It was another gangster, Lacoste.
First cousins.
Yes. And so LaGuardia, he's going nuts, dude. He is writing. And then reporters tried to get on the boat, and they're like, no, you can't get on the boat. But they let these guys get on the boat. And he is just apoplectic about like what's happening and how he's being treated and how good he's being treated. And he's like, what is going on, But that's kind of the end of it. And then they've got the testimony of guards. I read the reports of the FBI agents or whatever that they were like, no, there were no beverages. No, none of that happened. There were no parties. And so they all got paid pretty well too.
Well, also, keep that's a great point, because keep something in mind. Far be it from any FBI agent to make their witnesses or someone who's helped them look better than they really are. It's the old, when they indict the guy, he's the worst guy ever. But if he flips, all of a sudden, he attends cathedral. He's very repentant. When we sat with him, we could really see the contrition in his eyes, and we know he's a good man. And
I looked in his eyes and I saw a soul.
Exactly. I looked into his eyes, and boy, I was sure touched. But if the guy recants, all of a sudden he goes right back to being the worst person in the world, right?
Yep. But yeah, that was a crazy time, and we got like I said, Anastasia got a similar deal. They tried to say he wasn't a citizen, but he beat it in court, got to stay. But same deal. He was a military guy. You know, he went from gangster to military guy during the war and helped them on the docks and stuff. It's an interesting time in the history.
Well, that was the kind of not to say what cemented the deal, to use a cliche, was the understanding, like you say, Dewey would be on the fence about something like this, and Judge McCook actually didn't want to sign off on it at all. He tossed the ball to Dewey. They went on the assumption nobody knew Luciano was going to be deported at the time that he was brought to Grand Haven, and then there were numerous visits with underworld figures where it was assumed that people on the docks, and also I guess people in Sicily, but this is pertaining to New York, especially on the docks, thought he was coming back and thought he was going to come back as the boss. And so the orders that he gave out through Joe Sox Lanza and through people like Frank Costello, who was visiting him, those rules had to be followed, and they had to be obeyed because people felt there would be retaliation when he came out. So the real double cross for him was the deportation.
Oh,
Right.
Nobody knew that was
But
going to
he
happen.
remained the boss, and he was still calling the shots. I think they thought when they sent him to Sicily that he was done. Far from the case. He picked up right where he left off. He was powerful from Sicily.
Well, how do you factor Genovese in there? Do you think
Genovese
he
was
act as sort of de facto, or?
Genovese was in Sicily. He was friends with Mussolini, and as soon as
But he was
then he was back on our side. Yeah.
right. Then he was back with us. So you think he was more or less like a puppet, or just?
I think he was a tap dancer that like looked out for his own best interest all the time. I don't think he had any political agenda at all. If the United States would have fell, I don't think it would mean shit to him, honestly.
Oh no, not to him.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, he was like,
friends with
we're
Mussolini.
Mussolini, we're buddies, and then he's like, yeah, this ain't working out. Yeah, it's almost like Luciano went this way and Vito Genovese went the other way, and he's like, hey, I'm back.
You know, there
Yeah.
was quite
He
a
was,
bit
he
of
was
that.
like gone for a murder, right? Didn't he put like Carmine Galani up to a murder? I don't know, a reporter or something.
Yeah, Vinny the Chin Gigante to murder Frank Costello.
Yeah, but I think there was another one. He had Carmine Galani kill somebody. Like
Yeah, he was kind of
like a journalist, like a
Yes, there was a
journalist.
there was a journalist that Galante went at, and
Yeah.
I
I think it was tied to
I think
that.
he
but
was actually a
he left because
pro-fascist
he was going to be
journalist,
tried for murder.
actually.
And after World War II, he did whatever his little douchebag thing was. He wasn't nearly as patriotic as Luciano. And then he came back.
and Meyer Lansky was patriotic. They used to
He
go to the
was.
neo-Nazi meetings and bust them up
Yeah,
uptown in
he
Yorkville.
was. Genovese, not so much.
No, you're
Also,
right.
Benjamin
so.
Siegel, I saw a documentary a number of years ago
Yeah.
where he was operating a little bit in Europe too, and in the lead up to the rise of you know who from Germany, he could see the writing on the wall as to what was the anti-Semitism, as you know, because obviously when when the individual got elected in 1933, took power, and he just didn't go straight to gas chambers. You got to, anytime you put totalitarianism in, you got to do it gradually, and you got to propagandize the public, all that. He could see the writing on the wall, and got out of there, and he could see what was happening in fascist Italy as well. But from what I understand, Siegel, you know, they basically pulled out of their European ambitions because they, you know, keep in mind there was sort of quasi prohibition, certainly with narcotics over in Europe and that kind of stuff. But yeah, Siegel and Lansky.
Siegel was
they
overseas.
obviously-
I don't have my ducks in a row with this now because I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but he was over there, I want to say like Hungary or something, and there was a count there with a wife. Siegel is having an affair with the wife, and they actually go and they're still carrying on at the count's house, and there happens to be two Nazis there, and Siegel, being Siegel, wants to kill the Nazis, but the count is having none of it. The count is having none of it, right? He's like, no, you can hit my wife all you want, but you know, killing these Nazis is a little goosey for me. So yeah, it was a really interesting story. But Bugsy didn't kill the Nazis, but he wanted to, and they were high-level Nazis at the time. And Siegel could have like effectively really put a hitch in their get-along early on if the count would have just gave him carte blanche to more than his wife.
Well, you know, these totalitarian governments were a threat to their operations.
Yes.
You know, whatever was going
Mussolini,
on
no
in
friend of the
Europe, the
mob,
drug back and forth with Legs Diamond, I think.
Oh,
Where
yeah.
did they go? Was it England? You said Germany before, right?
Yeah.
These like Cuba, you know, they got rode out of Cuba on a rail when that revolution took place. So, you know, why would they?
Yeah. One of the
Yeah.
things that one of the, we'll just say, the talking points that the who dictator of Germany, when he was getting popular or starting to get into politics in the 20s, one of the things that he railed about was the gangsterism of America. You know, he talked about they're bringing it here, and he of course brought up Lansky, the Jewish names, of course.
Of course.
And there was in the 1920s in Germany, because of the Weimar Republic and how bad inflation, all that was, there was a large segment of the female population of Germany turning to prostitution to survive. The cocaine was becoming really big in Germany in the 20s, and other kinds of that. And of course, you know who we blamed, the Jewish gangsters for that. Although obviously regular German, gangsters were doing it too. But one thing that he used as a propaganda tool during his rise to power was pointing at America's gangsterism and look what's happening in America. You know, America used to be this country of virtue and Christianity and Protestantism and Anglo-Saxon look at it now. And if I have a degree in journalism, we studied propaganda from all over in some of my classes.
Putin's doing that right now.
That's what they did. That's really one of his main talking points, was blasting America for our alleged gangsterism because of prohibition in the 20s. And look at their streets are turning into Tommy gun fire zones, and that that's one of the things that they did, that he did. And of course Goebbels arrested these garbage pails over there, but that was one of their major talking points, actually. And that might be something we should do on another episode, because I'll tell you, you'll find it to be quite interesting. Of course, Mussolini, same thing. And what was one of Mussolini's number one targets? The mafia itself. And I actually and in Russia, by the way, the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin, he was robbed by the Russian mafia of that era. They called it the thieves' world, and that's what the Russian mob still calls it to this day. But one of the reasons why the Soviet government in its earliest days, during their rise of totalitarianism, went heavy at them, was because Vladimir Lenin himself was actually robbed by the Russian mafia while traveling, and he took it personal. But
hey, similarly, Mussolini went to Sicily to try to, I don't know what he was trying to do with the mob, but whatever. And he went to one of the Dons, and the Don, he had his army with him and stuff. And the Don's like, why'd you bring all these guys? I'm all the protection you need. Like, I can protect you. And Mussolini was pissed and took off and did some speech without him, and they stole his hat.
Yes, the mafia stole Mussolini.
Yeah, they stole his hat.
Yeah, they proved their power by robbing Mussolini.
Yeah. Which ended up being a bad call. Yeah.
that'd be a great show for all of us to do. We'd love to have you on for that, Ellen. You're a great
Oh,
researcher.
I'd love, yeah, that one I couldn't have enjoyed this more.
Yeah, this is a great sit down. We'll
It
conclude
was
real quick.
fun. I
with,
was gonna
go ahead.
ask you
Go
another
ahead.
question, but I
Yeah,
don't know if
absolutely.
we have time.
Yeah.
What do you have an opinion, Bill, about this invasion of Sicily and how they dropped a parachute with a flag that had an L on it?
What are we talking about?
The invasion of Sicily, when Luciano allegedly paved the way for the American troops to march in because
Into
the
Messina
Don,
under Patton.
Oh,
right.
I don't
Do
have
you
an
think
opinion on it.
there's a lot of credibility to that the
Oh.
American troops had carte blanche in Sicily during the war because of Luciano sending the word? And
I don't. I can't say I know a hell of a lot about it, honestly.
You
But
know what? It makes
no, I
sense.
don't think
That's
so.
something that makes sense though, because they really the fact is that Sicily for centuries, even after the Second World War, a lot of Sicilians viewed the mafia as the people that's their government there. You know,
It is, but I don't think Luciano represented the Sicilian government. You know what I mean?
that's right. That's a good point.
Yeah, and
You're both
I don't
right.
think. Yeah,
You're
I
both
think the
right.
notion
Yeah.
that Luciano's blowing a bugle and the American army's behind him and stuff. Nah,
Yeah, but the average Sicilian sees Luciano as a much more as a leader, and he was well known by then. But there's probably that's something to look into for sure.
yeah, it is. It is.
They
I
did.
don't know a lot
Patton,
about it.
I think Patton openly said that one reason why they were able to race Monty through there was because there weren't a whole lot of Italians and Sicilians in England. There was a lot more of them in New York, and the U.S. military was able
Right, and I
to
do know that
go through a
we
lot of
went
those
in
areas.
absolutely informed about a lot of strategic locations. We knew where the enemy was. We had a lot of help on the ground there because they wanted them out. You know, and the Sicilians and the mafia was very helpful in giving logistics and information to our army through Luciano.
Yeah, in
know
fact,
that for
the
a fact.
Germans had
So
to.
then there is some credibility to that he helped with the war and
Correct. Whether or not he, led the troops.
Yeah,
the
I know
Germans
what you
were
mean.
forced
I'm
to
skeptical.
take over the fight in Sicily and parts of Italy. Originally the Italian army obviously didn't do so well on the battlefield in general. And there's an old joke. I'm of Irish descent. There's a joke that
Go
Irish
easy, JC. What are you doing here, buddy?
Irish and Italian guys may be able to do some damage to you on the streets, but put us in a uniform, we're useless. But unless we're fighting in someone else's army, then we're great. But that's the old adage, we make great, we're dangerous as can be on the streets, but try to organize us into a military and you'll wipe us out. But the reality
in high school, I
was
never heard about the Irish Empire.
well, exactly. When was the last time you heard of other than the IRA, perhaps? But
yeah, I was gonna say you got the IRA. They're pretty passionate.
we're
They're
pretty
rebels,
good when it
though.
comes
They're
to
not an
the
empire.
underground stuff and maybe whatever. But
Right,
you
underground.
try
The
to.
Roman Empire stands on its own.
That's right.
Obviously,
That's
I'm
right.
Italian.
The British, before they colonized everybody else, they started with us. But the military, yeah, they when it came to going in there, that makes complete sense because we flew right through there, and the Germans themselves were forced to take over the entire defense of it, Sicily and Italy. They had by the time that D-Day happened, my great uncle served over there. He was in North Africa. He served in Sicily and Italy, and then to Normandy and all that. He had told me about some of this stuff. He said that going up the Italian peninsula was one of the toughest things they had to do. There was so many hills, so many rivers, and the Germans would just cross a little bit further north and bleed us dry. And they really didn't like that. It was very brutal. but they said the Italian people basically just come on through, and the
Yeah, they did not. They did not
Italian
like
troops
Mussolini.
were giving up. Some fought, but it was the Germans were forced to send divisions there that should have been in Russia, in Stalingrad or in these other bigger battles. One reason why they started to lose in 1942 and 43 in the East was because they had to divert their troops to Sicily and Italy because the Italians and Sicilians weren't really fighting that hard. And I'm willing to bet that one of the reasons was, the Italian and Sicilian population respected especially the Sicilians respected the Lucianos and others of the world. Plus, they
Well, they
also
hated
saw a lot of our
there's a
troops
huge
were
mafia
their
culture that hated
countrymen
Mussolini.
by then. A lot of Italian immigrants were, in the U.S. military itself. They
Right.
saw us as, these are our brothers in our long lost family members coming back here. So
Yeah, well, they're at least the enemy of my enemy, right? Like,
well,
it's just
you
like
wanna
American
see
politics
more,
right
more
now.
than that.
Do you ever
it
vote
wasn't
for
just
somebody, or do you vote against somebody?
Yeah, well, and also it's a lot easier to side with somebody if you see people with the same, especially back then when there was a lot more tribalism. When you see people with your similar last names, people that understand your culture, keep in mind from a quote unquote white point of view back then, Italians and Jews and Irish people weren't even considered Anglo-Saxon white, if you will,
Correct.
until
That's
just
right.
before that war. And
That's right.
they were, Irish need not apply. There was the mayor of New Orleans infamously once said that Italians are worse than the what. So the black folks will just say
Right, and a lot of people don't realize that during the internment camps, the Italians were locked up with the Japanese.
there was some
Are they?
Yeah,
there were definitely some Italians, but
they were Italian internment camps. Yeah,
in where I live in California, there was a Japanese internment camp just to the north of the where my parents' house was, and I have plenty of Japanese friends, Japanese American friends in my age group. I'm 48, and I'll tell you, their grandfathers when I was growing up, they absolutely hated FDR. They if you said anything nice about FDR in their house, even though they were flag waving patriotic Americans, they could not stand him. My friends would even tell me, don't say anything positive about Roosevelt or anything like that if we start talking about history stuff, because my grandfather, which I understand, they had their property stolen from them. They
came here. They bought
they
into
weren't
the
just
dream,
put
and
in
then
those
they got
camps.
canked.
The government took their homes and sold their homes to anybody else. And so when they, East LA, for instance, to the south of me, everybody sees it as a Hispanic area. If you look at it, Boyle Heights and all that, prior to World War II, it was like half Hispanic and half Japanese. They had all their homes taken from them and sold by the government. And it wasn't until the 80s that I think the Reagan administration started to compensate them for their losses, but they had to start over from scratch. And in many cases, some of them joined the war and went to Europe and fought bravely. One of the most decorated units in the Second World War in Europe was a Japanese unit. They felt as though they had to prove their worth as Americans back then to fight to the death, against the Germans. They didn't let them fight against the Japanese, but they did let them go to Europe and fight.
But it is kind of sad because we changed our names. We did all kinds of things to try to assimilate. You don't see that now. Now they want to bring their culture into here and change us.
My
family name was Giuliano. Right?
Well, that's true. Italians had to change.
Julian. It became Julian.
Italians had to change their names.
Giovanni became Jimmy. Everybody dumbed it down.
Ashkenazi Jews from Poland and Germany they had to change their names, and it's unfortunate, but that's how it was. And but as far as the battle in Sicily and all that, the reality is that Italians Italian immigrants and second and third generation were probably one of the key reasons why we went through Sicily so fast and were able to remove these fascist and these nationalist socialist trash pails. And
Yeah,
in
and I
that
did read the
war.
FBI files where they're trying to go back and forth about did he really do something or not. LaGuardia, not a fan.
I-
Not-
Well, LaGuardia
LaGuardia
was
was
a law and order
out by
guy.
then.
LaGuardia liked to throw slot machines into the ocean, didn't he?
Yeah, he ran on that Law and Order ticket, that fusion ticket, and he was out by then. He was out.
Yeah, he don't they have isn't the airport one
Back
of
with
the
him.
airports there still named after
They
him?
named an airport after him.
They
That's
gave
right.
him an airport, so he got an airport. He threw out
That
all the
ain't
slot
bad.
machines, but he got an airport. So,
Yeah.
real quick, you guys, we'll conclude it here, but let's do something real fast. Real quick, let's do a few minutes on Lucky's death, that kind of thing, and then we'll conclude with Ellen and Bill and me. We can shout out our websites and any of the work we do. So let's okay. So when was it? 1962.
62.
1962.
Oh.
What, Bill? What have you looked at?
Okay, who's on first?
You go,
Did I
Ellen.
say
Ladies
that
first.
before?
Ladies first.
Okay. I consult notes because I have senior moments. I can't
Oh,
trust my
absolutely.
brain
Me
to
Look at
too,
remember
baby. Me
anything.
too.
I really can't. But yeah, all right. The official death was a heart attack in an airport. Okay. And I had said to you in a rather New York snarky way, you know, an old guy has a heart attack, not cloak and dagger, right? You didn't comment on that. But there are a couple of factors that are a little fishy. I have to give you that. And he was actually meeting that Martin Gosh. Is that how you pronounce it? Martin
That sounds,
Gosh,
yeah.
Ghost, I think.
who had written or co-written. Actually, the Last Testament wasn't published for another like 13 years, but he had allegedly interviewed Luciano. He was hoping to make a film about him. He was a producer, right? And Lucky Luciano died meeting him at the airport. And Ghosh was seen putting something into his mouth. Now, he might have just had his stash of nitroglycerin pills. My own father always had nitroglycerin pills. May he rest in peace for all the good they did him. But he might have been giving him that. He may have been giving him a salt pill. But it gave rise to the rumor that Luciano did not die of a heart attack. So there's the Italian newspaper called the Telesara that published a story that potassium cyanide was found in his intestines in an autopsy. He was autopsied. I mean, I guess some astute researcher should look for that autopsy report, right?
Yeah.
But the United States press would not admit to that, and eventually the Italian press capitulated to the United States press and said, no, it was a heart attack. So in the meanwhile, there was a big hoopla about getting his body to the United States, and he's buried in St. John's, right in Queens, where I live, and I've seen the mausoleum. I've passed it a few times because everybody who lives in Queens ends up in St. John's, including John Gotti, and all of them. They're all there. Frank Costello. So I once, just as an aside, I once asked an administrative guy at St. John's, "You're Catholic and you have all these gangsters buried here." He said, "Well, we forgive."
Right.
Oh, they definitely do then. Yeah, that's a good point though.
But that's all I can really say. I mean, there was that controversy surrounding the fact that there were letters written to Ghosh that said, don't even think about making a movie about the underworld. And so there's legitimate reasons to think that there was a murder there and not an accidental death. I mean, what's your take?
Most guys like they're like, I'm gonna tell everything I know. They don't know shit. This guy knows everything. You know, this guy knows everything.
There's actually a guy
Yeah.
here that died under a similar circumstance. Tony the Hat Cornero. He was not officially made or whatever, but he was an Italian bootlegger, Los Angeles. He ran some of those old gambling ships that used to ferry people right into international waters so they could, go gamble, which back then was only 3 miles out. And of course,
Yeah, is that why they had ships? Because that was where they could
yeah,
legally or
absolutely.
avoid
And then
prosecution.
and then Earl Warren, the guy who later did the Brown versus Board education decision.
Yes, the liberal Supreme Court
Yeah, when
justice.
he was
Yeah.
our, I believe it was when he was our attorney general. He may have been governor, but he fought to have the harbor defined further out and based on geography. Way up here it starts, and then rather than the way it used to be, and he won. And it got moved further, but then so they moved the ships further, and then finally it all, yeah, there was a big old thing with Cornero and the Coast Guard and the cops before they finally shut it down. But in the 50s, when the original Stardust, which was a mob casino, the Chicago outfit ended up running it. I've been to the Stardust. I used to go there underage for a while. And then, of course, when I became 21.
That's great that you were there.
Oh, yeah, the Stardust. Yeah, I got to see. Here's the great thing about Vegas for people out here. Throughout the 80s, there weren't really a whole lot of new casinos that were built. A lot of from the 60s and 70s, I think it wasn't till the Mirage and Treasure Island that, before, and then I remember in 1993 when I was 18, that's when the Excalibur came up, and then MGM Grand, I want to say was 94, 95. I turned 21 in 96, but I got my first fake ID to go gambling at 18. But I got to see really the Mafia Vegas, if you will, the old casinos. I got to see this, the Sands and the Tropicana, the way it was. I got to see the Flamingo, it was almost the same as when Bugsy and all them did that. And there was that guy, Anthony Cornero, right when the Stardust was either just opening or about to, he had a drink that he drank at the craps table and mysteriously. And that was the same general era.
Yeah,
and
they
Cornero would have
no
been a
autopsy.
thorn in their side too, because he never joined the National Crime Syndicate. He was a very, I call him the most California-esque, kind of a Wild West Italian kind of guy, because he was very independent. Now he did work with them, like they would go in on bootlegging stuff in the Prohibition era. Mickey Cohen wasn't a fan of him because of that stuff, and Sika, the Genovese guys out here, and LA had its own setup called the LA Brigade, which is similar to the Combine, whatever. But there was a mix of Irish Jews, of course, and Armenians, others. But it was sort of open too, because Southern California is huge. There was so many people, and there was so much money to be made. But the Vegas guys, they had, Cornero took his gambling ships knowledge and all that, and his ability to run casinos to Vegas, and he, the cocktail waitress, by the way, that's handed him the drink. The Mafia made sure that she had a nice trip to the Bahamas on the house for, during the time of the investigation. She got to go she got a really nice vacation and treated.
She was really stressed out about the whole thing.
Yeah, she went
to Barbados.
They made sure she got to be out of the country. They're very generous people, making sure these.
Well,
you're making me want to go to Vegas.
I'll tell you a good point, and I'm not quick to buy into conspiracy theories. Although, don't ask me about Kennedy. I have a million conspiracy theories about the assassination. But it's quite possible that Frank Costello was able to silence the media on the poison thing, because he had a lot of clout with everybody, with the politicians in New York, with the media. And it's possible that that poison thing, they just quieted it down really quickly.
If you want
Possible.
a good Kennedy thing, by the way, obviously Robert Kennedy Jr. is running for office. I saw him on an interview about a month ago where he was asked, I believe it was by Bill Maher. He was asked about it, and he laid out you know, and not even really conspiracy theory. This stuff is stuff that's very fact basis and very coded.
Oh, of the
If
assassination?
his father
Did it?
was
Yeah, when
RFK.
Sirhan fired all those shots.
Yeah, they accounted for all of Sirhan's bullets, and there was more than just Sirhan's bullets. And also, he named the name of the equivalent of a military contractor back then. You know, in today's world, we have those guys that
Oh, yeah.
they love war, and you know
Yeah.
the Blackwater guys that love to do the Iraq stuff.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
the exit that his father was supposed to leave at the Ambassador Hotel in L.A. They changed his route at the last minute, and the exit they directed him at the last minute, none other than a goon, as he described him, from the military contractor business, was operating the door of where he was ended up going. And also, he pointed out that Johnny Rosselli, who was a famous mobster.
He was involved in the Kennedy,
Yeah,
JF.
right. Rosselli was involved. Mickey Cohen was running guns to the Middle East to Israel and some other places during that whole '60s era, during the different wars that Israel had with the Syria and all the different stuff that happened then. And Rosselli ended up in the Bay of Biscayne in
Right.
Florida, in a
barrel.
the very
A
day
barrel.
he was supposed to testify before the House, committee on this. And
Oh, yeah.
if you want to hear something interesting, look up. It's about a 15-minute segment that is, I think it was from Bill Maher's, not his show on HBO, the podcast he does, but it's on YouTube.
Yeah, I saw it too. I saw it.
Just he really lays it out, and it doesn't come off as
Write
some
this down.
grand
Yeah.
old blah 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 stuff. He says it very coherently, and he even said, "I did not believe any conspiracy theories about my father and Sirhan." And then he said that either a former FBI agent who was a friend of the Kennedys, because obviously his dad was a attorney general, or someone like that, credible person, told him, "No, you need to look at your father's autopsy again." And another thing that was on his father's autopsy was that there was gunshot residue, and it was at the point blank kind of range,
Right.
and it wasn't from Sirhan. It was from somewhere else.
It was in his back. Yeah.
And he said only after that did he even start to believe that. He said for years he even would not even listen to any of these theories about his father's death. And that when he saw that, he,
Right, and Sirhan's bullets were all
it made
accounted
him
for.
realize
More bullets than
that his
he
father
fired.
was probably set up. And a lot of that had to do with his father's views on the Vietnam War, that his father was going to end the war. And keep in mind, '68, that's when the Tet Offensive happens and all this big stuff. And
That was the worst year, right?
Yeah. America was really starting. The average rank and file college student was starting to really turn against this even more. And his father was listening to the anti-war voices. And his father, if his father had been elected, a lot of military contractors back then and guys that made money off of the war, these filthy warmongers, would have lost out billions. I mean, just so much money. And but that's something I'd love to chat with you guys about that. You guys are
I
both.
know we're on a whole.
Oh, I don't
different
have much
show now.
knowledge of the RF.
Definitely look into. I think you'll find it a great study, Ellen and Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Funny you mentioned it because I just got 3 books somebody gave me on this subject.
on RFK's assassination.
Yeah, RFK and JFK.
Oh.
Someone just handed me a bunch of stuff, and they're like, "Read this; it'll blow your mind."
You know, another thing that's
I read a lot though.
less violent or whatever having to do with RFK, you guys may find interesting, is that one of the tactics that RFK did as a way to fight the mafia was deportation, right? Now everybody knows that guys were deported to Cuba and they started the, you know, tried to do the casino stuff and all that. Well, another place they went to was Mexico. And a lot of places in Baja California, which is the state just south of California when you cross the San Ysidro from San Diego into Tijuana, there's a lot of places there that the mob built, and bars and clubs and stuff. And you'll actually see parts of Baja California where the club will say, this was the official spot that so-and-so from the Chicago outfit made, or so-and-so from the New York mob set up. There was actually a lot of mob activity in Mexico as a result of RFK deporting gangsters. Now, a lot of them weren't the more household names. You know, everybody's heard of the Carlos Marcello situation where he flew him out of the country in a not so legal way. But there was a lot of like mob captains, made men, and then higher level associates that didn't have their citizenship in order. And when they were deported, some would go to Sicily or Italy, of course, some to Cuba, but a lot of them set up shop and they started working with the California mafia guys in Southern California.
Yeah, that's a story you don't hear very much.
Yeah. If you look into it, you'll find it really intriguing. To this day, you go into Mexico, you'll see places this restaurant will advertise, this is the first spot that so and so from the Chicago outfit had. And
That's pretty cool.
oh yeah, it is. It's one of the things they do, and you know, you'll see it up and down Baja in Mexico to this day. That's some real stuff.
Cool.
You know, I think you could do a whole 10,000 shows on RFK and the mob.
For sure.
But
Maybe
you know, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
we'll do 100. We'll 10,000.
Yeah, you could, because it spanned years, right?
Oh,
But
sure.
I was just curious, Bill, do you think that there was a poisoning? I'm sorry to bring us back to that, but
Yeah, no, back to you
curious
started to bring
about
us back
your
to topic.
opinion. I'm curious about your opinion. Do you think that there's a conspiracy with Luciano's death, or you think it was just an old guy?
Well,
64, it's not that old. But I'll say this, I've heard more than once that if you want to fake somebody's heart attack, they use potassium. That it's a natural thing that's found in your body anyway, and it's often undetected. I've heard that a lot.
Oh,
well, remember the church committee hearings in 1975 where the Bill Colby, the CIA director, stunned even the members of Congress by saying, yes, we have a gun that can mimic a heart attack now. Obviously, they didn't use that on Luciano, but that lets you know that even by the mid 70s, the year I was born, actually, the CIA, and I'm sure every other intelligence agency would have this stuff too. They had things that could mimic that. Now, in the case of the mob, when you look at it, 62 years old, he's in the process of doing something they would have never wanted done. The disclosure.
that's it. The circumstances are fishy.
So right now,
Right.
if he was just living, you know, in Italy and laying in the sun and never talking about anything like that, and then he had a heart attack, yeah, I could say, yeah, you know, people die from that all the time. I mean, you know, there's people in their 60s, there's people who have heart attacks in their 40s or 50s, depending on what they eat and how they maintain and how their genetics are. Sometimes they're predisposed.
Right, and there would be an insertion point that would be detectable in an autopsy, but he died in the most corrupt place possible.
Well, see, that's another thing. He's in an area where
or you could inject it in the scalp and things that would be hard to detect, but there would be an insertion point. But my wife's an executive over a huge medical facility, and she's backed me up on this. She's like, oh yeah, you could inject potassium. The best way to induce a heart attack, and probably if they're old, nobody's ever even going to question it.
Yeah, and then you figure over there in Italy and Sicily, where, especially in the environment of the 60s, where they had even more power than they do now. Keep in
And a guy
mind,
that everybody wants dead.
they-
Easily done.
I
Easily
mean,
done.
even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we would hear these stories where some prosecutor in Italy gets his car, despite all of the governmental level protection that he had. And that's how dangerous it was for them in general. And if a guy like Lucky, passes away under those circumstances, I would think that the mob could easily have had control over any coroner office or any government official office that would be involved investigating it. And,
Plus, like we discussed before, he had memoirs, and then the wife burned the memoirs, and
we'll see. That's another thing that
Oh, the notes for the book.
yeah, the notes were burned up. Yeah.
why if it had nothing to do, if it was just some random thing, his wife, was awfully
Why burn 'em?
to carry on whatever the project was.
Right.
Look at Bugsy as well. Look at his takedown. The allegations were that Bugsy was getting so close to these movie producers in Hollywood. He's living in Beverly Hills. His house, I've seen it. His house to this day is a nice place. The whole city, really, Beverly Hills is still nice to this day, and that neighborhood is posh, and all that. He was in good with these movie producers, and it's even gangsters can get the fame bug, so to speak. You get
Yeah,
around.
but he was in too deep with the flamingo.
Yeah, exactly. He did that as well.
He was stealing
too.
from the mob.
But one of the
He
things
told
that they
me that
didn't like
himself.
about him either was there was allegations that he was, getting too friendly with some of these movie producers, and he was already talking about kind of, getting into that industry.
He
And
did, but he was
that
terrible.
would have been a
He
death
was terrible.
sentence.
They did like little trials to try to get him into movies. He sucked.
Yeah.
Like,
And
he's
remember
terrible.
when the Godfather came out, the allegation was that Columbo or whoever it was, it had the movie production guys change certain things. They didn't. I don't even think they were allowed to use the word mafia.
Right.
As
Yeah,
a
because
result of-
Columbia came in and infiltrated.
They never did in The Godfather, did they?
No.
and with
No.
Columbo,
Joe Colombo
set up that
came in and
civil
like
rights
regulated
league,
what you
that
could
didn't
and
last
couldn't
too
do with the
long.
movie.
They took him out just for having a civil rights league for Italians, right?
Well, Columbo was into that anti-defamation, Italian
Right, yeah, the Italian Anti-Defamation League.
Yeah, the mob was so against even fighting anti-defamation against Italians and them in general that they took out the guy that was going to try to fight that. So they were so secretive and into that whole idea of omerta to the nth degree back then that even the guy that tried to say, well, I'm trying to fight, the slandering of us and our people. No, you're not going to do that. We're not going to let you do
Yeah,
that.
too much heat.
Too much heat, too much attention. And quite frankly, we don't care. The government's going to do and say what they want about us. And we don't acknowledge them. Their view at the time was that we are the rulers. The government is not legitimate. They didn't, they didn't see the government as being a legitimate entity anyway. So we're not going to argue with them. And anybody that tries to quote unquote fight back legally is going to be dealt with in our illegal way. That's how serious they took it. That's sort of how the Russian mob in many ways is today. The Russian gangsters, that's how they see things. They didn't see the former Soviet government as legitimate. They saw as just a bunch of politicians, and they saw the Russian people and the other folks, the Ukrainians and the people from the other former Soviet republics that made up the whole Soviet Union as nothing more to be fleeced and to be picked apart and robbed and trafficked drugs to and prostituted out and all the racketeering they did. They didn't care about the communist government of that era, and they don't care about the government of it now. They, they just see the government as their opponent when it comes to law enforcement. And that's it. They see themselves as the rulers of their domain, if you will. And that's sort of the egotistical ways that criminals think, especially the high level criminals. Mexican cartels the same way. They don't see the Mexican government as being.
They do own Mexico more than the Italians ever owned.
Well, yeah, they
Italy
have
or Sicilians own Sicily.
they have their areas of influence, and who is it they mainly fight? Each other over who controls what. And they see themselves as the government. The Sinaloa cartel guys back in the day, they saw themselves as the rightful rulers of Sinaloa. The state governor of Sinaloa is simply some figurehead at that point.
Yep, I do stories on it every Friday. Hey guys, I gotta beat it, man.
All right,
like
thank
2.5
you. Real
hours.
quick, you guys. Ellen, mention a couple of your books out there as well as your website. Bill, you as well, me, and we'll conclude it right here. Go ahead, Ellen. Ladies first.
I guess The Man of the Hour. This is my book, The Case Against Lucky Luciano. Just happened to have a copy right next to me. And this is and my most recent. I'm also a Dillinger girl. I have Chasing Dillinger, which is about a police officer who brought Dillinger to the attention of the American public. Indiana State Police. Bill?
Yeah,
I've
you
been
go,
to the
Bill.
Dillinger Museum in Brown County.
Town, right, Indianapolis State House. And my other book I mentioned before, Don't Call Us Malls, Women of the John Dillinger Gang. My website are www. No kidding. This is a long one. It's get your pens. Luciano Trial 1936.com.
Okay.
And the other one is www.dillingerswomen.com. No apostrophe. Dillinger's Women. DILLING.
We'll put these in the show notes. So
that's plural too. Yeah. Dillinger's Women.
Dillinger's Women. It's supposed to be possessive, but I don't know. You couldn't put that apostrophe in when I picked the domain. So that's it.
We got to do a show on Dillinger. I think that would be amazing.
Sorry?
We got to do a show on Dillinger. That'll be amazing.
Yes.
Oh, I would love that.
So would I. He was a hero.
He
was like a hero when I was a kid. And like
I said, because you're from Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Hey, that works.
Boy. Yeah.
That works.
So
what about you? What's your website?
Go ahead, Bill, your website real quick.
I got a lot, but you can go to www.partners-n-crime, like the Tampa hip hop band, or you could go to extraordination.com. You can catch me on Spotify, iHeartRadio, anywhere you get podcasts. Also, you can see me. I narrate stuff for Dark Fusion if you find them on YouTube. And I'm on the radio, 910 AM Superstation in Detroit.
All right. And of course, mine's mobentertainmentgroup.com. I'm in the process of working on a book project. It's going to be about the fact that mob associates and connected guys, etc., by the time the 90s comes around, are much younger. I was barely 18. And effectively, I viewed us as a bunch of child soldiers at that point. And any empire that's falling, the last people that are literally handed the gun, so to speak, are the children. And it's a sign that it's over with. And so my book's going to be pretty much working title is Team USA versus the mob, the child soldiers of the 90s that fought the mob's last battles. And it's going to be a compilation of different mob figures. We're now in our 40s and 50s, but back then we were children. But the guys from New York that were young, the guys from Florida, California, Vegas, wherever else, I have a few that I'm working with. And there'll be a chapter on each of us. Later on, I'll do my own book and talk a little bit about my experience with the Detroit partnership. Of course, I was in California. It's where I'm from, and I operated out here. So anyhow, mobentertainmentgroup.com. Sub to our channels that are on YouTube as well. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. We're definitely going to have Ellen back on here. Bill, of course, as usual. Thank you to both of you for joining us here today.
Great time. Thanks, man.
All right.
Really nice to meet everybody too. Thank you.
Absolutely. You guys have a wonderful one. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. We'll be back next week.